I was a huge fan of the original, and it was a show that I was older than the protagonist, but I really watched it and enjoyed it, and it holds a special place in my TV memory, the same as it does for everyone else. And I didn't want to be the person that like just did like the quote unquote Black Wonder Years, and I didn't want to be the person that messed up the legacy of the Wonder Years. They don't know how to be adults. Okay, that was a salient point for us.
Beautiful melanin goddess that's before me. Hello. On this episode of Another Act, I chat with TV producer Saladin Patterson, who has been a force behind so many classic shows we all love, including The PJs, Frasier, The Bernie Mac Show, and now the reimagining of the highly lauded The Wonder Years. You know, Saladin, I know exactly where I was when I heard that this new reiteration of the Wonder Years was coming. And I thought that it was brilliant, especially because this is a TV series that a lot of us of a certain age watched in our childhood. And what was missing was this Black experience. How did this project come to you, and what made you want to be a part of it?
Gotcha. So the project came to me, honestly, from two different parallel paths. One was through Lee Daniels Entertainment. Lee had obtained the rights to the original Wonder Years because he wanted to, Lee's great at telling different sorts of Black stories. And he wanted to tell a Black middle class story set in the backdrop of the late 60s and everything that the late 60s was, with the civil rights movement, the turmoil going on in this country and abroad with Vietnam, and just, kind of wanted to see what that perspective was like for, to be honest, families like his own when he was growing up during that time, that were experiencing a quote unquote middle class experience. And so, but also Lee and I are both at 20th Century Fox. And so I have a development deal with 20th Century Fox, and they also approached me to bring my take on what that would be, based on my own comedic sensibilities, storytelling sensibilities, and things like that. And a lot of things made sense. And that's the business side of it. Yeah. The creative side of it, though, is when they first approached me, my first inclination was to say no. As you alluded to when we were talking earlier, I was a huge fan of the original, and it was a show that I was older than the protagonist, but I really watched it and enjoyed it, and it holds a special place in my TV memory, the same as it does for everyone else. And I didn't want to be the person that like just did like the quote unquote Black Wonder Years, and I didn't want to be the person that messed up the legacy of the Wonder Years. But when I sat down with Lee's company and we started talking, the first thing I realized was they weren't trying to do that either. Okay. Lee did not have in his mind, doing anything like the typical reboots that exist today, which is just like taking the same characters and just making them Black. So I realized, okay, then that allowed us to kind of focus on the things that we would be excited about. Lee and 20th were very supportive of me, like I said, coming up with my own take and basing it on my family's experiences during that time period. I did not come of age in the late 60s. I was born in 72, but the heart of the Wonder Years story is that adolescence, and is that nostalgia, and is that coming of age in terms of, those universally relatable experiences of adolescence, not fitting in or feeling like you don't fit in, not realizing that no one feels like they fit in, the first crush, your best friends, all those sorts of things. So those were the things that that as a storyteller, I have been tapping into and was excited about tapping into. And when they let me put onto this reimagining of it, setting it in Montgomery, Alabama, which is where I grew up, putting it in the South in the backdrop of the late 1960s and basing it on like my mom and my dad and my aunts and uncles and their experiences, at least I was then able to be invested enough to say, okay, let's think about what a unique take on this would be, knowing that we don't want to be derivative and we don't just want to be doing what they did in the original, but want to make it our own. And, that's when I was able to kind of wrap my head around what a reimagining could be. And the way I approached it was I looked at it like, if you look at like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you have Captain America, Iron Man, but you also have Black Panther. And Black Panther is a part of that creative universe, meaning it exists, but it's his own parallel story with his own characters and his own narrative and his own cultural significance. That's kind of how I wrap my head around what a reimagining of the Wonder Years would be, similar to the Star Wars universe as well. How, you have your main Star Wars storyline, but you have all these other storylines that coexist in the world, and they don't necessarily even overlap. And so my pitch to 20th and ABC was, the Wonder Years is an umbrella that kind of refers to a time in American history and a point of view about what the American dream is based on middle class American values. And we are under that umbrella, but we are our own family, and our own family with their own storyline, their own agency, their own relevance. And we're telling stories that through the prism of what the American dream represented for the Black middle class at that time. Because if we think about it, we haven't really seen that point of view in TV and film before. We've seen a lot of stories about the civil rights movement, and that's great.
Yeah.
And those are all valid, but they usually come from a particular perspective of the struggle of it. But you haven't seen what that meant to Black Americans who on the surface were middle class and on the surface had the same educational aspirations for their families and their kids, the same occupational trajectories as their white counterparts, but being Black still made the American dream something that was a little more elusive for them because of the things that were going on in the time and in the place in the case of Alabama. So to me, that was a very interesting challenge creatively to tackle. You take something that an audience thinks they're familiar with, the late 60s, American values, middle class, but show them a different perspective, but then show them how they can still relate to these characters as they overcome the particular challenges they had.
I love that. What was it like once you get to the set and you're making this TV show happen, and you're making it happen while legislation is being discussed, or while headlines are happening that feel like the same types of headlines that could have happened in the late 1960s in Montgomery? What was that like? Because I can imagine that the conversations you guys had on set were very, very rich.
Very much so. One thing that stood out to me is, when we started shooting the pilot, how many of the crew members came up to me and said, a lot of times, like our grips, our gaffers, our camera operators, they say a lot of times we just take jobs because they're jobs, but this is one where we actually feel a significance to what we're trying to do. And this was white crew members and Black crew members, and so that kind of put me in the mindset of what you're saying, kind of keeping a present day lens on what we were experiencing because of what was going on around us at the time. And we happened to we shot the pilot the 1st of April this year, and that was right around the time that Georgia was passing the very restrictive voting rights. Well, not voting, the very restrictive legislation that was eroding a lot of voting rights. As did other industries, we found ourselves having to ask ourselves that moral question, because of what our show is about, because of the fact that we are doing a show that is set around the time of the Voting Rights Act, could we in good conscience film that show in a state that was dialing back a lot of those gains? And that speaks to, to your question of the perspective we had when we started doing this, when I stepped on set and understanding the things that were going on in the real world that were relevant to the show. And that was a salient point for us, I walk around the set then when we did the pilot and now, and I gotta tell you, it is a new and good, I want to say wonderful. It's gonna sound like I'm being corny though. It was a good and wonderful experience to see so many Black crew members. I've never experienced that in my own professional career, seeing a set made up of this many Black people behind the camera, and so I do take pride in being a part of today when you can see that, and I would not have wanted to have pulled out and not had the opportunity for those people to work with those people for them to work with me.
You have a very interesting background and a very interesting path to Hollywood. You have degrees in engineering and psychology, which now that I think about it, probably is very beneficial to working and navigating in this career. But tell me a little bit about that. How does that background show up in your work right now?
It's one of those things where in hindsight, I can see how everything was a part of God's plan. Everything contributed to what I'm able to do now. At the time, I was lost and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, like a lot of people at that age in your early 20s. But, when I first decided to take that leap of faith and and attempt to make a career as a writer. You know, I certainly approached it from a very analytical point of view as an engineer. You know, I made a worksheet of all like different story structure and story points, and I was sitting in front of my TV with my VCR, and I recorded Seinfeld and Frasier, and Mad About You and Ellen, all the top shows, and I would just break down how the writers did those episodes. I broke down every component, how many scenes they had, how they told the stories, it was A stories and B stories, you know, all those sorts of things very analytically, and that's how I started to understand television and story structure. I was in grad school for psychology at that time, in the PhD program, so I stopped at my master's and came out here. And I certainly, yes, trust me, yes, there have been many, many times when having a psychology background has been very helpful in this industry, more so in the role I'm having now as a showrunner, which is 70% management and 30% writing at the most. You know, earlier on, it probably helped me in terms of just group dynamics. But to be quite honest, what really helped more than anything else was just the life experience of being a grad student, because I was blessed to be a grad student with other grad students who were much older than me and had a lot more life experience. And they helped me with the point of view of, in our early 20s, it's ridiculous for us to think we actually know what we are supposed to do or what we want to do, you know?
Yes.
And it's just a different mindset. You know, I was around people who had lives already, you know, and so that really, not only did it free me up to be able to explore writing, but it honestly freed me up to start looking at people and looking at people's stories and understanding, you know, how people's experiences and their own backstories affect who they are. And that just, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I realize it now, that was me starting to exercise those muscles I would need as a storyteller myself. You know, storytellers, to me, you're just observers of the world, and our job is just to spit back to people the world that they're existing in, and hopefully in a surprising way, though, you know. And so those figuring out, you know, those observational skills about the people around me, I think contributed to, you know, to my burgeoning storytelling career.
As you think about this new series and this new version of such a classic, iconic show, what's a victory for you? Because you and I both talked about how we were fans of the original series.
Right.
I haven't watched the original series since it went off air, but I can still remember the things. They stayed with me. And in some ways, I think they were foundational. It did what a TV show is supposed to do. What for you is a victory with this new version of the Wonder Years?
You know, I've been thinking about that a lot, because my biggest fear is that people will make assumptions about the show and not give it a chance. Make assumptions that, oh, it's just going to be a black Winnie Cooper and a black Kevin Arnold. Make assumptions that, oh, it's just going to be a whitewashed version of what the black experience was during that time. You know, like, you know, I see comments, how can you call the late 60s the Wonder Years, you know? And I think that's really shortchanging the black experience, you know? There's a professor named Amanda Ann Klein at East Carolina University who described it in a way that really resonates with me. Nostalgia should not be a privilege that only white people have, okay? Black people deserve nostalgia as well. We deserve to be able to look back, look back at our experiences and remember the fond times as well. And so a victory for me will be people giving our show a chance. It has to stand on its own 2 feet, but giving our show a chance and coming away and saying, you know, that was its own thing. And the bigger victory to me will be another generation of people, black and white, who years from now will say this reimagining of the Wonder Years meant to them what you and I say the original meant to us. Like, to me, that's the biggest victory.
Well, that was excellent. Thank you so much for doing this today. I know that you are knee deep in production for this new series, easily one of the most anticipated new series coming to the dials this fall. So thank you so much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me. I could not be more honored and flattered to even be given your time. So thank you so much.